Hi everybody, my name is Janie. I'm a third year comm student in California, and I'm currently trapped in my house in a shelter in place, as I imagine a lot of people are. So I'm studying for my step twos right now, and a classmate had asked me how to study for step one, so I decided to just make this video since now I have a bunch of time to do stuff like that. So this video is meant to help people who maybe haven't been helped that much by other how to study videos for board specifically. People who have ADHD or dyslexia or any kind of learning disorder or way of learning that might not be totally accommodated for by kind of mainstream advice. So yeah, so I would say these are just things that help me. I didn't get a super high score by any means. It's just a way, I'm just making this video as a way to kind of help people get through their kind of anxiety during this time, which is obviously heightened for other reasons. So anxiety is normal. I would say it's helpful to try to turn it into excitement, because it is actually, well, I thought it was pretty fun to study for boards, because after this period, you'll have more basic science knowledge than you'll ever have again in your life, and that's kind of interesting. And you actually do retain a fair amount of it, even though it seems like you wouldn't, because some of the information seems so arbitrary. But that said, I would say take more time than you think you need. I got a lot of advice before saying take 2 weeks or 3 weeks because you're gonna forget everything you learned at the beginning, so it's better to take less time than more. I can totally see why that would be the case, but for me, I learn better by internalizing things than than just memorizing or retrieving. And of course, step one, level one, that's 50-50. Half of it is mechanism based, and half of it is knowing the name of some arbitrary thing. But I think if you take longer than you think you'll need, you'll be able to you'll give yourself a little bit of buffer room to try to figure out what kind of things are working and not working. I needed that because, like I said, that's why I'm making this video, because a lot of the resources that I found that ended up being super helpful, I didn't know about when I was starting out. But yeah, so I would spend the first half of your block of time that you have studying the kind of fundamentals super early, so to kind of internalize how they work. I wouldn't say there's that much actual memorization involved, more just kind of almost visuospatial understanding of mechanisms. So CV, renal, and resp I would learn together, especially CV and renal, yeah. And then GI and endo I would learn together. There's a lot of GI and endo, more than I expected on the test. And then neuro and musculoskeletal I would learn together. So those are kind of the fundamentals that I would spend the first block really internalizing really well. And then for the latter half, I think it makes sense to really dig into the pathology of each system, and then use mnemonic tools to memorize them. So I loved Sketchy for bugs and drugs, and even for Path, because it was just easier for me to retrieve a narrative and picture-based system when I needed to quickly. Pixorize is another thing that's basically Sketchy for biochem, though I would use them closer to the end. I don't think they're as good. I would only stick to maybe a couple picture-based resources, because they often use the same symbols to mean different things in each system, so it can get confusing. I know other people use I forget Picmonic and other stuff, but yeah. So if you've already started using one of those in during preclinicals, then I would probably stick with that. But those are super helpful for remembering clusters, differentiating between clusters of things that are very similar but different in these particular ways, like the nephrotic syndromes and the nephritic syndromes, stuff like that. In terms of the actual bulk of studying, I think doing practice questions is the best way to learn, unfortunately, because they take forever. And of course, everybody knows like what the best ones are. I think, you know, UWorld and Amboss were for me the best ones. But that said, it's like useful to buy a blank drawing book and start filling it out with the incorrect answers and kind of connecting them all conceptually. So here's the one that I use. It's really, really thick, and it's also pretty empty at this point. So I stopped using it. But yeah, like the bigger and like kind of more massive it is, the more room you'll have to connect different concepts to help you remember things. I would say it's important to not get hung up on making it actually pretty, because that takes forever. You don't even really have to write down, you know, all of your wrong answers, just the ones that you feel like you're getting wrong frequently. And then that way, if you make each page different, then it's also more likely that you'll be able to like go and retrieve a certain piece of information if you can bring it to your mind's eye, like where you put it on the page. Also, if you're studying for both the COMLEX and the USMLE, it's important to study for both of them, which is to say study for both of them using different tactics. So that was my first mistake, because like I got the new COMLEX level 1, and there wasn't really that many good like studying tools available for it. And I was truly actually shocked by how unprepared I felt during the exam itself, and it was frankly kind of traumatizing. But basically, this is totally my opinion, and I'm not sure if this is actually true, but it seemed like COMLEX was trying to test for how rapidly you can come up with the correct answer for like fairly common things, like how fast you can read a bunch of information and draw out important things to glean from it, but the actual questions themselves weren't as hard, whereas USMLE step 1 is kind of testing you more on your breadth and depth of knowledge, but with shorter question stems. So those actually do take like fairly different approaches, and I think if I were to change something about how I studied, I would have, you know, accounted for that. But it's really hard to study for 2 really big tests at the same time. So yeah, I don't know if I have a good way of dealing with that. So yeah, do the practice questions versus practice tests. So the NBME also puts out a number of old practice exams, or old exams to practice on, and it's important to do those, but not too many of them, because they take forever. You know, they take an entire day if you're doing them timed, and they don't provide you with explanations for correct and incorrect answers, so there's less opportunity for learning. And if you do too many of them, you know, you'll have spent, you know, like a week just doing practice exams and not learning anything. However, there are a couple of really amazing resources that I found during this, created by the good people over at Reddit. I mean, not people who work at Reddit, just people on Reddit, that I thought were super helpful, and I wish I had known about them earlier. One of them is called nbmeanswers.com. They have the correct answers to all the NBME questions from their practice tests with the correct answers and the crowdsourced explanations for those, so you don't have to necessarily waste as much time, and you can kind of see how well you're doing. The second is called the unofficial Step 1 score predictor, which is basically an Excel spreadsheet that uses data from a bunch of years before, as well as performance in UWorld and a number of other kind of Q banks to give you a projected score. I'll put the links of both of those in the description, but for this one, I would use this at your own peril, because, you know, it's Reddit. I would say that the data is biased towards higher scorers, so it's likely to be less accurate for people who are scoring on the lower ends of things. But it has what is really useful for is a 95% confidence interval score. That will give you a pretty solid understanding of if you're in danger of failing, say, or whether you're in the ballpark of the score that you want. And those have been pretty accurate for almost everyone who's used them. It's also okay to take a break for a day or two for your sanity. Like I said, after I took level 1, the COMLEX, it was just so horrifying that I was scheduled to take step 1 the next day, but there was just no way I could do that. So I rescheduled for a couple of weeks later because those were the only days left at that point to reschedule for. But my husband and I had a trip planned to New Orleans, like in between that time, and I was trying to figure out, whether I should cancel and just study instead, because it seemed like while I was studying that if I, stopped studying for a day, I would just lose everything. It would just like fall out like a sieve or something. But I was like, no, let's just take this trip, for my mental health. It's like it's necessary. But I was surprised, like, not only did I not forget things, I actually started doing a lot better after I took the trip. And I think also it's just like, it gave me the chance to be like, okay, like, what is the worst case scenario? Like, what is, like, okay, like, I fail these exams, I don't get into residency, I don't become a doctor, I'm, like, saddled with debt, whatever. Like, yeah, that would obviously suck. But there's, like, a lot of other interesting problems to solve in the world, It's like, it's not like you're going to run out of interesting things to do. So it's, I don't know, New Orleans is great. I highly suggest people visit there if they're feeling super stressed out about this. But anyway, that's most of my advice. Basically that your anxiety you can harness for good, to like kind of don't use too many resources, but use the resources that will really help you. Important to assess your learning. Important to, do the fundamentals up front and then the details kind of later when you're less likely to forget them. Using mnemonic tools, and not putting too much pressure on yourself because, as you can see, it's very hard to predict what the world is going to be like tomorrow. And if you learn differently from other people, you might actually have a leg up. So yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, let me know and I'll try to answer them.